Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And inshallah, today we're going to be continuing with our tafsir right there with tafsir Surah Al-An'am. And let's just kind of remember what we talked about last time. Let's just really quick, just kind of go over what we did last time. We did the tafsir from the ayat وَتَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا لَا مُبَدَّلَ لِكَلِمَاتِهِ وَسَمِيعٌ عَلِيمٌ. So we do two types of tafsir for this one. The first set of tafsir from ayah 115 all the way to, let's see, this ayah, لَهُمْ دَارُ السَّلَامِ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. We did the first type of tafsir, which is going through, let's call it the pathway of seeing epistemology, seeing the resources of knowledge, and we also talked about the data, and we also talked about the interpretation, and we went through that part and that path the first time, and we talked about صدقة وعدلة and how the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would contain truth, contain justice, no change in the words of the Lord Almighty, and then how different resources exist out there, whether it's basing it on or basing truth, quote unquote, based on the majority, or whether we're looking at considering a speculation, which they might say studies, they might present it as studies, you might present it as theory, they might present it as, well, this is how we had our own experience develop this kind of, I guess, anecdotal or experience or knowledge or whatever it is. They might make it as if it's empirical, they might make it as if it's anecdotal. So we went in details with the different kinds of, let's call it, presented as if it was knowledge, whether that was dhann, speculation, or whether that was basically il-hawa. And we're speaking about just different desires that people will have and motivations that will shape their vision. And we also talked about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that there are two kinds of paths to knowledge. The first path is basically the path of getting acquainted, in other words, the knowledge itself, and recognizing the source, which basically is al-wahi, and that's one piece of knowledge that you can basically find, which what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, يتبعون إلا الظن وما تهوى الأنفس ولقد جاءهم من ربهم الهدى. And that's that piece. ولقد جاءهم من ربهم الهدى. In other words, there's a type of knowledge that would be your responsibility to embrace as the truth, basically as جاءهم من ربهم الهدى. So we can give you evidence that you could see a pattern in the world, etc., but it's your responsibility to actually see it, to recognize it, to connect these patterns together, and to come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the creator. There's the other kind of a path to recognize truth, to recognize righteousness, which is discipline. That's why that ayah continues, ذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ, that other path through discipline, to let us know that in terms of knowledge, there's one path to help you recognize truth, تَمَّتْ كَلِمَةُ رَبِّكَ صِدْقًا وَعَدْلًا, but there's another path that actually comes through discipline. But this discipline is not only a discipline, kind of like a yoga that you would practice on the outside, but it's actually inner discipline and external discipline. And that's basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let us into, that guidance to help us through what we had learned about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how we would find the purification of the inner self and the external self. Basically, that is the behavior, and make sure that we recognize what that involves and how that will have a greater implication on our life. So greater implication if we're talking about sin, and a good positive implication if we're talking about obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we're talking about leaving sin, if we're talking, just the different things in legislature. And certainly the implication would be, you would see the person as if they were live with faith. You would see how they would be walking in a certain a certain path of light where they're capable of recognizing the right from wrong, capable of recognizing what will lead them to basically seeing the world in a way that matches and that goes in congruence with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in nature. So we talked about that piece of it. In the following day, in regards to this tafsir, we looked at it from a different lens, and we looked at it from the lens of the psychological impact and how it affects the person internally, how it affects them externally, how it affects them spiritually, all of those different areas. We went in details with that piece of it. But now I think it's very important to, yes, we did talk about, let's say, maybe how this inspires us, but it's not enough to say how this inspires us, because we definitely need to make sure that we have the right tafsir, we have the right, let's say, explanation that was presented by scholars. So all of that would be somewhat of what we would say في ظلال القرآن, basically in the shade of Quran, and what we can get as an inspiration by looking at these ayat and getting some inspiration from the tafsir itself. But that certainly would not whatsoever void our need to go back to the tafsir itself. So just give me 1 second. And okay, back inshallah. So that definitely does not void, and certainly we always have to go back to Tafsir al-Qurtubi and actually see what the Mufassirin themselves had said about this tafsir. All right, so we left off at ayah 123 in terms of Tafsir al-Qurtubi. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ أَكَابِرَ مُجْرِمِيهَا. So that's ayah 123 right there. Let's say, because we did do وَذَرُوا ظَاهِرَ الْإِثْمِ وَبَاطِنَهُ إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَكْسِبُونَ الْإِثْمِ. Did we? Yes, we did. So I could see right there that we did do some scribbling. So that tells us that we already had done this one. Okay, did we? Yeah, in fact, we went farther than that. So, okay, here we go. This is where we left off at. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا فِي كُلِّ قَرْيَةٍ أَكَابِرَ مُجْرِمِيهَا لِيَمْكُرُوا فِيهَا. And that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made for each and every single city a certain, when we're looking at akabir, let's say, so جعلنا في كل قرية أكابر مجرميها. He said, basically what that would mean is that the kafirin, exactly the way that the kafirin would basically see what they are doing as something that is right, as something that is righteous, as something that is basically a noble act, they would create a narrative. So why would they create a narrative? Because it is part of our nature that we cannot live in discrepancy between how we explain something, in other words, how we see things in our mind, and our action. We can't be in contradiction with ourselves. Since we cannot be in contradiction with ourselves, we will create some kind of narrative to make it seem like we are not contradicting ourselves, when in reality, we could be contradicting ourselves. So what happens? That there would be certain akabira mujrimiha. There would be the akabir. What is al-akabir? If you look at the word akabir, where's that word right there? Akabir. Akabir, the opposite of it is basically the ones that are smaller, okay? We're speaking about akabir actually means we're talking about people that would like to present themselves that they are somehow containing all what basically requires pride. So that's the akabir. Are they really containing and deserving all that position of authority, position of pride? Are they really deserving it? The answer is no, they're not necessarily deserving it. But is that always that connotation? No, it's not always a negative connotation. Not always a negative connotation. It can also be something that carries within it a positive connotation. So what are we talking about? So akabir can carry a positive connotation to describe perhaps maybe those are, let's say, akabir al-ulama. Those are the ones that are the noble scholars. So based on that, I basically had considered the connotation of containing basically a positive vibe, and we translated akabir to mean noble. Okay. But looking at the context, that's going to tell me whether that is supposed to be a positive connotation or whether that's a negative connotation. So how do I know that this is not a positive one? Because it said mujrimiha. Akabira mujrimiha, this is not a positive connotation. This is to tell me that they are arrogant, that they are the ones that were leading them in crime. They were the ones that were leading them to falsehood. So then in that situation, we would look at this, that it is basically a connotation that tells us that these people were considered the leading figures that had misled the masses, and that's one main reason why many are also deluded. One of the main reasons, just like before, it was talking about some reasons, whether it was a theory considering the herd mindset or the herd psychology, or whether we were talking about basically all these different areas of what they might follow in terms of theory, or in terms of speculation, or in terms of personal experience, and all of those areas that they would think that it validates, according to them, it validates that what they're doing is basically something that is based on at least the past, and therefore it is to give an expectation that this basically will lead to a good future. Okay, so then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know that there's another resource that many would be following, which is akabira mujrimiha. They would take, of course, certain celebrities, certain basically certain people that may appear successful, and this is extremely important. They would be called influencers. They may be considered successful by that community, but just because they manage to get certain, let's say, successes in dunya, that doesn't necessarily make them the ones to be successful in leading them for al-akhir. Big difference. Just because this person happens to be successful in making money, that doesn't necessarily mean that they would be the people that would be the right people to help you basically find the right choices for your akhirah. They may have the keys to knowing how to make money, become millionaires, whatever it is. Just got to make sure that you're looking for the right resources to help you figure out the answers to your life. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala considered that they are mujrimeen. What's a mujrim anyways? So the word mujrim comes from jarama. Remember la jarama? Okay. The word mujrim, basically whenever you would have muf'il, that's basically the pattern. So if we were to go back to sarf, that would be mujrim, meaning the person that does the jarima, the person that does the crime. Okay, so that would be a mujrim. And mujrimiha, that's basically talking about a plural. So there wouldn't be necessarily one person behind all these conspiracies and all these things that are happening in the world, but there would be a set of different mujrimin. There would be a set of different actors. We're not talking about actors as in Hollywood, but we would mean actors, meaning whether politicians, whether we're talking about economists, or whether we're speaking about just different actors that It may even be college professors, or some are singers, etc., but they would be playing the same type of agenda. What agenda is that? But basically is su'ul fahsha. It's basically to misguide. To one person is probably working on creating, let's call it aqidah misguidance. The other one is probably going to be speaking about maybe making a song, or the other one is probably, hey, let's attack these salihin, let's create a genocide, let's do this. So in other words, each one is basically playing a different role, and the main player in all of this is actually Iblis. The main player is Iblis. That's the key thing, is that certainly you could see awliya shaitan basically in different images, but the truth of the matter is that awliya shaitan, each one is basically doing a certain play, a certain role to misguide, to mislead, and at the end of the day, when people would come to me and say, hey, do you believe in the Illuminati, etc., I said, well, I don't need to believe in the Illuminati itself, because I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had told us and foretold us about Iblis. Basically is our main adu, that there would be different methods that may be used against humanity, against haqq, against truth, against the salihin. So I know for a fact that Iblis is behind all of this. And I know for a fact that Iblis will have awliya. I know for a fact that there would be these akabir al-mujrimin. لِيَمْكُرُوا فِيهَا. Hold on. So al-akabir, he said, it is a plural of al-akbar, basically here referring to the ones that were considered al-ulama, the ones that are considered as the key figures, the chieftains, and the leaders, the different kind of leaders. But certainly, does that mean that when the ayah is mentioning them, is it mentioning because they are basically the ones that deserve somehow respect, or is it because they are here, we're calling them as akabir, we're calling them as the big figures, the leading figures, etc.? So does that mean that they're going to be, on the other hand, held accountable more than the followers? Okay, so you could see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning them in order for the other followers to recognize that just by seeing them in a position of power does not necessarily mean that they are doing the right thing. Just because you see this influencer basically has these number of millions of followers, or you would say that they made this much money, or that singer made this much money, or whatever it is, that does not necessarily mean that this person had figured out the keys to success, and therefore consider them as basically the ones that you would take as role models, as the ones that you would take as your I guess the celebrities that you would mimic in order to get you to success. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, because many times without us knowing, especially on social media, the younger generation in specific, they would see these influencers, and certainly they would be presented as the ones that are so smart. And even though they didn't really do much, it's not like they had to figure out how to put in a lot of energy, comparing them, for example, to probably a college professor. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. But at the end of the day, even if a person was a college professor, if they are misguiding and misleading others, that doesn't necessarily make them worthy of that respect. So perhaps I'll respect their abilities to maybe present certain projects, certain services to humanity. Well, thank you very much. But at the end of the day, is that I would have to differentiate and distinguish between me taking a celebrity in dunya, for example, if it's a positive thing, like maybe a professor in mathematics, and between taking somebody that is perhaps a hafidh al-Quran, two different things. This is probably a celebrity, dunya celebrity, then I'll just have to make sure that I would put them within that angle, within that corner, and not necessarily start asking them about their opinion about what I should do in life, or basically ask them for advice, or ask them for guidance in terms of, even if they may be inspirational, motivational, all these different things, I have to differentiate and make sure that I would put each and every single person in the corner that they belong in. There's a dunya corner, there's an akhirah corner. A dunya corner would basically make them limited to dunya matters, and perhaps even more limited. Maybe I'll take them a good role model in mathematics, but certainly not in akhlaq. Okay, same thing. We can have somebody that may be a good leader in akhirah. Okay, somebody probably maybe a good alim that basically may have good degrees in Islamic studies, etc. But when it comes to practice, they're probably behind with that. And that's why, of course, it's really important when you want to take a alim or a scholar as your role model, yet sometimes you have to know their scope. So certainly there's a scope that this alim can probably give me guidance in terms of ilm, but in terms of discipline, they basically are probably not the best people in terms of discipline. And this is what Imam Malik had basically talked about. And he said, there would be 70 people, and I know 70 people that even if they were to make the dua for rain to come, they would be their dua would be answered, but I would not take their words on hadith. Well, why not? Hey, you could see that they're pious. He said, well, their scope is in discipline. Definitely, I would take them as a good example, as basically good inspiration, as a good inspiration in terms of discipline, but in terms of ilm and knowledge, I cannot make them a good resource on ilm, even though in discipline they're doing an outstanding job. And that's the same thing. Somebody can be so good in their discipline. They're always making dhikr, they're doing qiyam al-layl, they're just so good in their in religious integrity, their taqwa, etc. But when it comes to fatwa, that doesn't mean that qualifies them to give you fatwa. Same thing. Somebody can have a PhD in Islamic studies, they have very good ilm, etc. But when it comes to discipline, I'm not sure that they're the right people in discipline. And that's why it's really hard to find the alim that is a abid, a alim, a scholar that's also a person of discipline, that's also a person of worship, that's also a person that can be an inspiration even in discipline and even in akhlaq. Okay, so when you look at this one, you're also looking at not only in the corner of akabir al-mujrimin, so somebody I might take, even though he's considered as, well, by the definition of Quran, as a person that is jahil, okay? But this scholar inspired me to, has great akhlaq, has great discipline. If only he would say the shahada, and this person would be just the most inspiring person. But he just still didn't say the shahada, which is a key thing. Okay, so in that situation, al-hikmah dalatul mu'min. Al-hikmah is supposed to be the area of search, the area, wisdom is supposed to be the area of search, it's the area of focus, whether we're speaking about hikmah in terms of knowledge or whether we're speaking about hikmah in terms of wisdom. So we could see a lot of these wisdoms, basically even coming from non-Muslims on social media, speaking to us about respecting parents, respecting perhaps people's boundaries, recognizing your value. Of course, certainly maybe different motivational speakers, and some are doing an excellent job, I must say. All I need to put on is probably this hijab to this perhaps Christina, and she'll be this mu'mina right there. And this guy who's probably a Christian pastor, all I need to do is just take off that cross, and he's already got the beard, and just put an amama on him and that turban on him, and he's right there just ready to be the Muslim pastor. Okay. And yeah, I mean, you could see, and subhanAllah, it's a malaka. But at the same time, I can take them as motivational speakers on certain ends, but make sure you don't exaggerate their position in how far they would inspire you. So this is extremely important. Sometimes it can be a slippery slope, and that's why it's important to understand Islam. It's important to start to have ilm. Why? Because with ilm, you'll be capable of using that ilm as a lens, as a magnifying glass, basically to make sure that you're scrutinizing all these different words, all these different resources, and you're making sure that you know through ilm how to distinguish between the tool, the interpretation, and also the data and the resource. And that distinguishing these areas is actually key to help you get to your foundation based on La ilaha illallah. Because the second you confuse the motivational speeches, which is what falls into the interpretation category, and you confuse the data, and you confuse the resources, then you're going to find yourself basically so connected to the interpretation, and then you're going to be completely lost in terms of how we relate this to the actual foundation and the actual resource in the actual wahi that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent. Okay, let's see. And certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said the reason why they were mentioned here, why were they mentioned as every single city would have akabira mujrimiha? Why were they even mentioned? He said, well, basically because they're the ones that have the highest influence in causing harm, in causing destruction, in indoctrinating the masses, in certainly deluding the people. They would have the highest potential to do so. So that's why there was a greater emphasis on these people and the impact they have on the masses. Okay, what were they doing? لِيَمْكُرُوا فِيهَا. What is al-makr? Makara is the opposite of basically putting things in order. Okay, so il-makara, it depends really also on the context. I think I've mentioned that one before. It depends on the context, because makara, if the context is in relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that does not mean that this is the opposite of guidance and justice. Okay, but if it's within the context of speaking about the kafirin, it would then mean that they would plot, that they would put an agenda, and basically different methods, different schemes, different plans in order to basically get the masses off the path of guidance. And what are some of those tools that they might be using? Of course, right now it's so apparent. We don't even need to get into that. The tools that they may be using, one, the first tool is getting you off the resources. What does that look like? Well, that would look like in education. Okay. Yes, colleges can be a place of education and basically expanding your vision. And they may be areas that may be a resource of indoctrination. So you really have to be careful. And that's what parenting basically is supposed to be responsible for, teaching the children from their early childhood how to find the right resources, how to go back to basically building within their minds, building basically the foundation of how they would view the world in the right manner. Okay, so that's basically having the right resources in place and how they would read the data and basically bring in that interpretation. And this is extremely important. And of course, that's one side. But then you've got the al-makr can be in the education and can also be the other tools, which is in delusion. In other words, altering your discipline. Remember when we said education is in two kinds. One is in the information and two is in the discipline. So there you go. So some of that makr, some of that agenda that will be used is going to be centered around re-educating you, or let's call it indoctrinating you. In other words, confusing you in terms of information, whether in reference, data, or interpretation. The other method is in discipline. Okay, so when we're speaking about discipline, they would also use different methods. One is which is the key one in terms of discipline, either pacifying you with perhaps running after your needs, and we're talking about maybe running after employment, trying to get a couple paychecks, or trying to basically run after just a simple means in life. That's one method. The other method is trying to change your discipline by changing your place of desire. So what does that look like? I mean, we all share same desires as human beings. We even share desires, the same desires as with animals, whether we're speaking about desire to survival, or whether we're speaking about desire for reproduction, or whether we're speaking about part of our instinct is also seeking security. Okay, so security, we're speaking about survival in different ways, whether like we said, in terms of food, shelter, all of that, or reproduction. We share that with animals. Okay, now having that being said, sometimes they will use poverty as a method, and sometimes they may use not full poverty, but basically, let's say, a certain level of poverty. So they will basically let you run after a paycheck. Okay, there's another method which is giving you money. Okay, and that's even more dangerous than poverty itself. What's the evidence? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَنَبْلُوَكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً. Shar, evil, is a fitna, and it's basically an ibtila, it's basically a hardship. But al-khair could also be a fitna. And certainly that's one of those methods that those influencers may use in order to delude you away from focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the method of al-ighraq, the method of abundance, the method of making things available to you, such as what kind of things? If we're talking about food, making you basically just eat and eat and eat more. And we know already that right now we're basically getting some things, hormones injected in our chicken, in the food that we eat, and basically just different things, and without us realizing that it's getting us into that gluttony. Okay, that's number one. Number two is basically getting us always thinking that we need more. Thinking that we need more by advertising about food, basically giving us the availability of, especially, hey, you need dessert. After you eat the meal, you need a dessert. You need this. And we basically would continue always thinking that, oh, we need 3 meals a day. In Islam, you don't actually need 3 meals a day. No, you do not need 3 meals a day. But then, of course, the system was convincing us that we need 3 meals a day, but that's basically not a Muslim system. In Islam, you don't need 3 meals a day. It's enough to basically get 1 meal a day. You can probably small snacks here and there, but not necessarily 3 meals a day. So the other method is, of course, we're talking about, remember, things that we would share with animals, whether it's food or whether it's reproduction. Same thing with reproduction. They'll basically make women available. They'll use that method. They'll basically make all these different things to affect your brain, to affect your vision, to affect your desires, to make it available to you, and basically make you feel that you are firing up and you need to somehow need to empty your desires, and you fall in the zina, and that basically would have an implication on the wiring of your brain. So when we're speaking about sin, okay, it basically would rewire your brain. And we're speaking about a society that would basically also get rewired within that area, then you would synchronize with everyone else. And you see yourself, a whole different set of information systems is basically downloaded into your brain. And yeah, we're just using, I guess, information technology language, and we see it just downloaded into our brain. And then what we function in is completely on a completely different software. And then you're seeing the hardware is completely appearing different. And that's basically, oh, now we really turned ourselves into these robots. But that's basically what we're seeing right now. That's basically what we're seeing right now. Our hardware is different. Our software is different. Our basically whole system is different. And then we are rewired. Okay. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that there is a system that they would basically create in making liyamkuru fiha. There would be this agenda that they would be using in order to delude the masses. So why would they even do that? Is their goal, you ask Trump, is he going to say, well, yeah, somehow he's working on behalf of shaitan? No, he's not. He will say that he's working against shaitan. And he'd repeat it a couple times, etc., that he's working against shaitan. Okay, but that's one thing, is that these akabir al-mujrimin, they may not realize that they're actually working in favor of shaitan. So just because they're saying, I'm not working for shaitan, it doesn't necessarily make them so. They themselves had lived in such delusion for such a long time that they themselves had actually thought that they were, hey, they were the angels. And that, yeah, they're the angels basically going to God. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically tells us that you will see these people, that what happens to them? يَحْسَبُونَ أَنَّهُمْ يَحْسُنُونَ صُنْعًا. They had thought what they were doing was actually in favor of justice, in favor of humanity, in favor of good, in favor of basically world peace and all of that, when in reality, all they had done was really commit genocides and fuel genocides. They have blood on their hands. They have basically all that support for shaitan. They didn't even know it. Okay, how do we know? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, in order for you to recognize shaitan, he said, that's one way for you to know, is that he would order بالسوء والفحشاء. He would order for basically a suit wal fahsha. That's right there, the type of lack of discipline where the person is running after, especially zina. It's quite interesting when you look at you look at First Lady in America, sorry, but is nothing but, you know what I mean, basically an ex-prostitute, or I don't know if she is an ex, but basically a prostitute at one point. That's what she was doing. And certainly Trump basically was a person, all these models, and that's what he was fueling. In other words, he was basically just after women. Yeah, he doesn't drink, and he thinks that's a horrible thing, okay, which we agree with him on, but not for the sake of akhir, but for the sake of living more in dunya. But he is nothing but a person that is so hooked on zina, so hooked on prostitution, really. And now, of course, trying to silence those episteme files, whatever. Okay, let's see. But they're all, of course, playing the same game. So now they're trying to somehow present themselves that, no, I'm not like Epstein, and no, I'm actually different, even though they were not only on pedophilia, but, that was basically their life. But Allah al-Musta'an, but a country whose leaders are basically with this history, that basically tells us that it's a society that basically is considering فإنه يأمر بالسوء والفحشاء, considering those that would get into السوء والفحشاء, those that would take السوء والفحشاء, is basically their place of inspiration and leadership. That's how you know where shaitan is. Simple as that. They order for su wal fahsha. Yes, okay, there you go. That's how you would recognize whether this is shaitan inspired or whether this is inspired by good. Okay. وَمَا يَمْكُرُونَ إِلَّا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. They would only يَمْكُرُونَ. What is يَمْكُرُونَ? So يَمْكُرُونَ is basically the same verb as يَمْكُرُوا, but the verb is مَكَرَ. Okay. مَكَرَ. So here, يَمْكُرُونَ would tell us that it's going to be an ongoing plan that they would put in, ongoing plots. But even though they may think of it as, yes, I'm basically doing a plot on someone else, but the truth of the matter is that they're plotting against their own demise, against their own selves, and against their own fate. وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ. And they would not recognize it. Wait a minute. So why وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ? Because the real one to control everything is not them. They may think that they can control the politics, control the economy, control the military, control all of that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there would be these subtle ways that the Lord Almighty would be working in to basically curtail all their plots and all their agenda. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us know that الحق that يعلو ولا يعلى, that truth will basically prevail and nothing else will go beyond it. So even if there were moments of perhaps, let's say, tripping, where truth probably didn't make it to power, etc., but that does not mean that truth is basically going to be one day going to be defeated. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know that al-haqq will always prevail and al-batil سيهزم الباطل. الباطل will basically be defeated. Okay. سيهزم الجمع ويولون الدبر. سيهزم الجمع ويولون الدبر. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let them know that, yeah, right now you're probably looking like the person in power when you're looking at, of course, that was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. They were at one point, the people of Quraysh were the ones in power, and they thought, well, with their power, that they could easily eliminate the Muslims. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had foretold them that سَيُهْزَمُ الْجَمْعُ وَيُوَلُّونَ الدُّبُرَ. That they're the Jama, the bigger number, they're basically going to be defeated. And وَيُوَلُّونَ الدُّبُرَ, and they will even run away. And that's what happened in the Battle of Badr and also the Battle of Uhud. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us know that in terms of truth, don't look at what's happening today. I know that in history, as Muslims right now, it's one of the worst time in history that we are so divided, and we are right now under nothing but the plot of different superpowers, different kafir superpowers. We're looking at China, we're looking at the US, we're looking at Israel, we're looking at India, we're looking at all these superpowers, Russia, we're looking at all these superpowers, and the Muslim Ummah, despite the huge numbers that it is in, couldn't create one coalition. Certainly, we're looking at Pakistan growing in its powers, but still has a lot of problems and poverty, economical, basically. You name the problem, basically Pakistan has it. You name it, and basically is there. But certainly, right now, hey, got nuclear power to let others know that, you know what, don't step my area, don't step my territory, because I'm basically a person of power. And but we see that Muslim countries are all right now easily right there. Israel easily bombed Iran, bombed Yemen, bombed Syria, bombed Tunisia, bombed basically Qatar, and no Muslim country was capable of standing up against Israel or creating some unity, even if they may not act upon it, just creating some kind of a unity to say, hey, this ought to stop. But they basically had created this summit, and then once they went for the summit, they couldn't agree on who the enemy is. Are you serious? You couldn't agree who the enemy is? If you can't even agree on who the enemy is, you're really going to be somehow uniting against them. If you're still doubting that Israel is your enemy, then, hey, you basically are just letting me know, if you don't recognize that Israel is the enemy after committing all these genocides, that tells me a lot that someone is collaborating, and all of them, that they're basically players of that same game. It's that simple. They are part of that play. They are part of that game. Okay. All right. Let's see. وَإِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ قَالُوا لَن نُؤْمِنَ حَتَّى نُؤْتَى. Okay, here we go. So now we're at the end of the page right there. مثل ما أوتي رسل الله الله أعلم حيث يجعل رسالته سيصيب الذين أجرموا صغار عند الله وعذاب شديد. Let's see. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically let us know. So now he's scrutinizing what? إِذَا جَاءَتْهُمْ آيَةٌ قَالُوا نُؤْمِنْ. If they didn't say nu'min per se, because we have to continue the sentence. لن نؤمن, لن نؤمن حتى نؤتى مثل ما أوتي رسول الله. So what did they say? Did they actually get the signs, that they get the miracles, that they get the evidence? Yes, they got the evidence. So what did they say? They said لن نؤمن. Did they say nu'min? No, they said we're not going to believe. So in other words, what they were trying to do was not seek the evidence, but they were trying to somehow put in the different procrastinations, put in basically other reasons to somehow delude not only the masses, but also try to undermine the confidence, even the confidence of the Prophet. Okay, let's see. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then exposes something else of their ignorance, which is that they had said that we would not believe until we also become prophets. Wait a minute, why did they even say that? I thought they didn't believe that there were any prophets after all. Why would they say we would only believe if we too had become prophets? Because they recognize that there were other prophets like Musa, Isa, etc. They do recognize, although, they believed in Prophet Ibrahim, but they didn't believe in Prophet Musa per se. Okay. But at the end is that they had an idea that there were something that other nations had said, that there were prophets. But of course, they wanted to say, well, you know what? We're not going to accept it because you are the one that's coming with this. So what do you want? well, we would basically not want to submit to you. We have an issue with you as a person. So what do you want? I want to be the person. I don't want you to be the person. So what is that? That's basically that arrogance right there. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَلْ يُرِيدُ كُلُّ امْرِئٍ مِّنْهُمْ أَن يُؤْتَىٰ صُحُفًا مُنَشَّرَةً. Each one of them basically wants to have their own scripture, and they don't want to submit to the scripture, but they want to be the center of the scripture. So what they're really seeking is not the truth per se. They were just seeking a position. They were seeking another type of arrogance, and they just are looking for different ways to basically solidify and give them more power to basically their position of power. So they weren't seeking truth. They were just seeking different religious ways to basically give them approval that they are deserving the position that they are in. And this is extremely important to keep in mind, that some may use, ladies, please pay attention to this one. This is very common that, when you look at con artists, okay, I've said this multiple times, but we'll say it again. When you look at con artists, they don't come in and say that they are scammers. They'll come in and basically use a language that appears very professional. It appears to be in your favor and all of that. And that's extremely important to keep in mind. Okay. Same thing when Fir'aun. What did he say? إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُبَدِّلَ دِينَكُمْ. He presented himself as a person of integrity. I fear that he will change your religion. أَوْ أَيُظْهِرَ فِي الْأَرْضِ الْفَسَادِ. Or he may cause destruction on earth. What did he use? He used the method basically hiding behind integrity, hiding behind religion. And this is extremely important. Ladies, this is very important. Just because a person is a sheikh does not make him a person that really understood the discipline. He may have had multiple ijazas and all of that. Discipline is completely different. Discipline is a completely different ball game. Just because they have the ilm, it doesn't mean that they have the discipline. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ says, إِذَا جَاءَكُمْ مَنْ تَرْضَوْنَ دِينَهُ وَخُلُقَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. What is al-khuluq? Al-khuluq is basically discipline. It's basically discipline. It's not just to say, their religion, their knowledge about the religion, they're actually looking like they would do really good in understanding the religion. Understanding the religion is one thing, good for them, okay? You got your ijazas, you got your PhD, good for you. But discipline is what makes a difference. Because when you get married to this person, you're not going to be somehow sitting together and let's repeat and give me this ilm. And you know what? I can go back to the books and I can extract and derive all that ilm. Not a big deal. It's the issue of discipline that really matters. The discipline is what you, as a wife, are basically going to be living with. Their integrity, their mannerisms, their anger, their tantrums, their patience, their commitment. That's what you're going to be living with. Their integrity, their trust, their honesty. That's what you're going to be living with. But if they're a person that cannot even be a man or even man enough to recognize their responsibility towards this household and to basically be the person to support and sponsor and support the family in different ways. And if they don't recognize what it means that here I am as a woman, I'm definitely physically weaker. I'm definitely, yes, I was ordered to obey you, but if you're going to abuse my obedience, then that's another form of slavery, another form of probably getting you, not respected and etc. So yes, if that person is not living up to the discipline, then you're going to be the one to pay the price. Because at the end of the day, you're going to be the one under his qawama, whether you like it or you don't. So you have to recognize that just because a person has a religious appearance, that does not make them really fit for the appearance that they would present. That's why it's extremely important to have the wali in place. And that wali is supposed to protect you from those con artists that would come in a religious presentation, and they would delude the masses, or they know how to play on you using most beautiful words. And trust me, those that would be called narcissists, you would see the Quran would talk about, the munafiqeen, and he would say, يَقُولُ تَسْمَعْ لِقَوْلِهِمْ. When they speak, you would listen to them. They would say full words. You can't beat their words. And their body appearance, they look great. كأنهم خشب مسندة. What happened? تعجبك أجسامهم أن يقولوا تسمع لقولهم. When in terms of appearance, great appearance. In terms of words, outstanding words. Can't beat their word. They're very good in their eloquence. They just know how to speak, and you really get attracted to their method of basically communication. You would really think that it sounds excellent on all ends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, هُمُ الْعَدُوُّ فَاحْذَرْهُمْ. Those are actually the real enemy. So you have to be really careful. Just because they may come with an attractive appearance, it does not make them really the ones that you would turn to in safety, turn to in support, turn to basically in trust. You have to be kayyisun fatin. You have to be smart. You have to outsmart those con artists that are using religion as a method to delude the masses. You have to be smart. You have to be fatin. You got to be wise, and don't fall for any of this. And this is extremely important. How do I become wise? Well, sometimes knowing the methods that shaitan uses is one important way to recognize basically the markers. And this is one way. The Quran is telling you, listen, look, it will come to you that, hey, they just want to be prophets. I actually don't want to just become a prophet because you want to be looking for a way to basically find guidance. No, you just want a religious label to be put on you in order to continue with your mischief, to continue with your misguidance. You're looking for a religious label. That's what you're looking for. Continue with your arrogance and put halal on it, or put sheikh on it, or put mu'min on it. And when the truth of the matter is that you are not looking for guidance. You're just looking for another label to continue with your misguidance. That's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was basically telling them. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira was the key figure who basically said, if prophethood was containing any truth, then I should have been the one to basically be fit for it. Why? Well, I'm older than you, telling the Prophet ﷺ, and I basically have more wealth. What did he want to say? He considered that, hey, I've got more experience, plus I was basically a lot more successful, and that is proven by the amount of money that basically is with me. Abu Jahl then comes in, of course, objecting, and he said, we would not even accept him whatsoever, and unless we would get the same inspiration that would come to him. Okay, let's see. So some scholars actually said, well, they didn't seek prophethood per se, but they were saying, well, we would not believe in you until you would bring Jibreel alayhi salam and the rest of the angels basically informing us that you are a true prophet. And he said the first one was actually more accurate in terms of interpretation, according to al-Qurtubi. So what is the evidence? And he said, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Allahu a'lamu haythu yaj'alu risalaته. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who he would anoint with his inspiration / with the message. So who would be one trustworthy and basically a person that is worthy in their discipline for that. Okay. And this is basically to know who really is worthy of that risala and basically that mission to carry. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, this is basically just letting us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to anoint a person, so basically a prophet from early times. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Musa, وَاصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. اصْطَنَعْتُكَ لِنَفْسِي. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Prophet Musa. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that there was a plan that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically set right there. Okay, let's look at a saghar. Okay, so now we're looking at an implication here. سَيُصِيبُ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا صَغَارٌ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ. And those that had committed the crime. Wait, what crime did they commit? So the crime, their rejection of faith. Okay, and then they would say, hey, if only we would get that inspiration, we would have been the ones to be more worthy of that inspiration and be the prophets, and not necessarily us needing and required to obey the prophet himself. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, as a result of their crime, what is the crime? Their rejection of faith. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what motivated them to do that was basically their akabira mujrimiha. They were basically deluded by their arrogance. In other words, their success, by the way, yeah, of course, they had some success. They had the success. They were the chieftains. They definitely knew how to say things. And by the way, one of the key things for leadership is knowing how to communicate. This is key. Knowing how to communicate, knowing how to speak, knowing how to present yourself is actually key. That's why even when you see the Quran is all about communication. Quran is all about communication. And وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. But when you see as well, the most important thing that you would teach your child is how to communicate their anger in a professional way, how to communicate. I must admit, my daughter, a teenager, and there were times when, so many times, I would give these lectures and lecture after lecture. Of course, your own profession can sometimes take over. But then I was coming across this expert in parenting. And there were many times where I would tell my daughter that, no, you shouldn't be talking to me that way. And she would say, well, I didn't mean it that way. And I would say, well, you said it this way. You know what? You're grounded. You're this. And I felt that the relationship was drifting away. But until I come across this tip that this expert in parenting was giving, and she said, when you would want to correct your child and correct the method that they would be using in talking to you, tell them to edit their words, modify the phrase, and give them the chance. You say, you know what? I'm going to give you the chance to rephrase this. Maybe you could say things differently. Let's say they get a second chance and maybe the third chance. It's okay. Well, I'll let you come back later with a modified way to say your concern or say your objection, but I want your words to contain them. So I started using this, and I would tell my daughter, you know what, go and write it on ChatGPT, okay? If you don't know how to modify it, and tell ChatGPT to reword it for you. And alhamdulillah, it worked. And she would, write it there, put her frustration, and then it would reword it for her to teach her the method of how to say things in a way that contains respect, in a way that basically would not drift the relationship between me and her. It's just wanted to share this one. It's the issue of communication and how important it is, because the way your children communicate with you will determine a lot in terms of their future on how they will communicate with those that, whether it's an in-law or whether it's the people at work or whether it's the people on the street, and how they're able to communicate their frustration, or probably communicate their objection, or probably communicate with those that basically, let's say, lack discipline. Okay, so whether it's giving the information or whether it's the lacking discipline, and how to stay within discipline, even when others may go off the discipline, that you would still be determined to stay within that discipline. That's why I remember that ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nur, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَأْتَلِ أُولُو الْفَضْلِ مِنْكُمْ. And it was basically right there teaching Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, you are from Ulul Fadl. You should not, that was in the context of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq when Sayyida Aisha, all that slander was being told about her of a possible affair between her and Safwan ibn al-Mu'attal. But then, of course, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was so outraged from Mistah, and he basically spoke ill and got into basically all the rumors that were spreading around to Sayyida Aisha, even though Abu Bakr as-Siddiq was his basically financer. He was Mistah himself was extremely poor. He fully depended on Abu Bakr as-Siddiq for basically housing, for food, for shelter, all of that. He was fully depending on Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. But then, is this what you give me in return? You start speaking ill about my daughter? So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq makes that oath that, you know what, since you engage in all of this, I'm not going to sponsor you anymore. And I'm basically not going to be funding you in any way. But that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, no, wasa'. What is actually what is befit for you as being ulil fadl is that you would give al-masakin, you would give first ulil qurba, basically the relatives, the masakin, the needy, and basically the muhajirin, and you would center yourself around the principle and not around who gives you favor in return. In other words, your discipline is based on the principle and not based on how in your favor or in others' favor, how that would basically affect you, because you live based on the principle, not based on what you would get in retrospect. Okay, so when you look at سَيُصِيبُ الَّذِينَ أَجْرَمُوا صَغَارٌ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know that in terms of what they had said, and because of what they had said, that in the motivation, what motivated them to say that was really the arrogance. And because they were running after arrogance, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, what they will be getting is basically saghar. What is a saghar? A saghar is basically humiliation. So why humiliation? Because they were being arrogant. So what's the opposite of arrogance? Is basically humiliation. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that whatever a person would do, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would punish them in the opposite direction, to let them recognize basically the implication of what they had done. عند الله. Why عند الله? سيصيب الذين أجرموا صغار عند الله. I thought that عند الله means near Allah. Is that really mean near Allah, or is this from Allah? So when you look at the word عند. عند can mean near, and in لغة عربية, the preposition may sometimes have different angles. Okay, so it can mean different methods. So we're talking about عند can mean min. Okay, and certain prepositions can mean other meanings or other prepositions. Okay, so when you say صغار عند الله, that's basically to let them recognize that, you will be humiliated, and no worse than being humiliated before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that moment. Ya Allah, نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Ya Allah, نسأل الله العفو والعافية. No worse than being humiliated before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And that's why he said, عند الله. And what does that also mean? That this would be something that it would be consistent, and that they would be basically in this position where they would be humiliated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a position where all you want is just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to look at you with the eye and basically see you with his mercy. فَمَن يُرِدْ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. It's going to be the last ayah we'll be doing today, inshallah. And فَمَن يُرِدْ, what does that mean when you say فَمَن يُرِدْ? Is it me that makes the choice, or is it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes the choice? Well, you put in basically the intention. You put in the intention. You put in the path. That's why أتاني هرولة, or they would come to me basically مشيا أتيته هرولة. They would come to me walking. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, well, I'll come to him metaphorically, that is, come to him running. All right. And he would ذكرني عنده, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mention him في ملأ خير منه, in a place that is even better. So you mention Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to, let's say we're doing a dars right now. How many people are in here? 14 people. Got 14 people. Okay. And you basically go on and you wanted to join and basically have different people join as well. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that just by you basically joining, all right, in this Zoom or in this group right there, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises that you will be mentioned, whether myself or you, the attendees, you will be mentioned in a platform that is even better than the platform that is probably right there on perhaps Zoom or whatever it is, in a better platform, in a platform where malaika are present, and he would speak of you and basically speak all your names and say they had attended this, they were listening to this, they were basically remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they were listening to those ayat, they were listening to that tafsir, etc. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will mention basically each and every single one of us on a platform that is way better than the platform, the visual platform that we are on. So let's say, when you say فَمَن يُرِدْ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. Whoever Allah wills. So I thought you said if you will. Yes, certainly. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would look at your will, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned in Surah Al-Ankabut. What did he say? Well, he basically said, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Those that would put in an amount of jihad, an amount of effort, basically. You invest an amount of effort, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bring back in return to the effort that you had basically put in to seek what? To seek different ways, to seek paths to lead you to Jannah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. You put in the effort to look for that path, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised to make you find different paths. I thought it was one path to Jannah. How is it different paths? So it's basically giving you different paths to lead to that major path to Jannah. Okay, so in other words, you may be struggling with your husband. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically create that path of ease along with your husband in order to be together, go to Jannah. You're probably struggling with your children. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inshallah, will make them guided to help you basically make it easy, to help you find it easier to get to Jannah. You're probably struggling to stay on halal income. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will probably create a path of halal employment for you to get halal income. And the list goes on and on in what struggles you may be finding and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will open paths for you that will make going to Jannah easier. That will make going to Jannah easier. That's why he said, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا. So what do I have to put in? What do I have to invest? You would basically have to recognize that there is an effort to invest in, that there is some amount of hardship to endure. Don't expect it to be without any hardship. There's going to be some amount of hardship to endure. First, in order to be on akhlaq, there are 4 key elements. Number 1, recognizing justice. Number 2, which is basically haqq. Number 2 is basically recognizing that there's an amount of sabr, amount of patience that you have to basically endure. Don't expect it to be easy and without any struggle, without any pain. There's going to be an amount of pain. And number 3 is basically al-iffa. There's going to be a lot of offers. There are going to be a lot of offers out there to try to sway you away from the right path, give you these offers to basically, think that if maybe I can combine dunya and akhirah together, but that's nothing but a delusion. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us basically recognize that to go through these methods, recognize justice, live that patience, and certainly get into that endurance despite all the offers out there, that you would put down all the different available things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what will make you courageous. That's what will make you brave. That's what will make you in power. When we speak about courage, we're talking about power. That's when fear would not drag you away, would not be something that will keep you away from the right path, because you will only have one big fear, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. So right there he said that means he will basically make the path to guidance more expansive. In other words, it's going to be wider. You're going to be finding it and basically give you the different support to basically make it easier for you. Just like we said earlier, you're struggling with your husband, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically give guidance. And remember, the heart was basically named as a heart because it means it may flip. So instead of probably getting into butting heads with your husband, let's perhaps maybe live the principle, and inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him hidayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him hidayah, maybe change his heart, but if of all the methods didn't work, you definitely have the right to basically leave. There's no question about that. Okay. The other thing is that فَمَن يُرِدْ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ, he said he will also make the reward basically look and appear that it's worth it. In other words, it is worthy of being good. It is worthy of basically doing all of this righteousness because Jannah is worth it. So what happens? You're looking at 1, expand the road and the trail to getting to Jannah. 2, basically support them to continue on the right path. And 3, basically let them see the reward as worth it. Okay, let's see. So when you look at the word يشرح صدره للإسلام, okay, so give them guidance, etc. What is يشرح صدره للإسلام? What is يشرح? Okay, we did say before that the word شرح could mean something is expansive. And شرح could also mean to explain. And شرح could also mean to bring clarity to something. Okay, so in شرح could also mean to expose. Okay, now here's one thing. When you look at whether we're speaking about to open up something, to expand something, to bring clarity to something, to expose something, to basically remove the ambiguity. So what are we looking at? Their heart, their chest would actually, they will be capable of seeing the clarity. They will be seeing how open that is and not seeing it as curtailing their freedom, but they will see it that, no, it's actually giving me a better life. And they will also be capable of seeing al-bayan, clarity, to different things in life. It's like, you know what? The second I did my shahada, things became all of a sudden so clear to me. It was like this epiphany. It's like, oh, now I get it. Now I see where this is going. Now I basically had this kashf. What is al-kashf? Al-kashf is like this clarity. Al-kashf is like an epiphany. Al-kashf is like this moment that you are recognizing everything around you, and everything just became so obvious to you. Okay, and removed all the ambiguity on things that were surrounding you. Why am I suffering like this? Why am I basically living this hardship? Why is this coming? Well, basically Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving you all of that hidayah that would come in. But I want you to look at this one. When you look at فَمَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ أَن يَهْدِيَهُ يَشْرَحْ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ. It's their chest that basically would find this clarity, would find this openness, would find the ambiguity basically uplifted, all of that. Is this talking about the information side, or is this talking about the discipline? This is first talking about the discipline. The information. Okay. And then let's say, well, this is, since it's talking about the information side, well, can it also be talking about the discipline? We can also embed within discipline, because you would not put in the right discipline unless you had your heart basically find that foundation of truth. And that's يشرح صدره للإسلام. That's the foundation of it. وَمَن يُرِدْ أَن يُضِلَّهُ. So now we're talking about the word يُضِلَّهُ being opposite to the word يَهْدِيَهُ. Okay? Okay, now صدره, and you got صدره right there. Okay, let's see right there what al-Qurtubi had said. وَمَن يُرِدْ أَن يُضِلَّهُ. يُضِلَّهُ يُغْوِيَهُ. What does al-ighwa mean? Al-ighwa is a form of delusion. What does that mean? It's a way that your brain is making you think of something containing good, when in reality it contains basically your regression, it contains harm, it is not going to bring you success, it's basically going to bring you into further and further away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and further away from your success. That's al-dalal. Al-dalal is to think of something as if it was in your favor, when in reality it's against your favor. You know, think of a child. They would think eating sugar is good for them. They would be basically, you know, going into a tantrum and crying and all of that, but then it isn't until they would probably sneak to get the sugar that they will basically then recognize that, oh, now I have a stomach ache. Oh, so you have a stomach ache. What happened? And then you go and you discover that, hey, they actually ate half the box of those cookies or whatever it is. And that's why they got a stomach ache. So that was one way for them to learn that, yeah, not everything you desire is basically going to be in your favor. فَمَن يُرِدْ وَمَا يُرِدْ أَن يُضِلَّهُ يَجْعَلْ صَدْرَهُ ضَيِّقًا حَرَجًا. Basically make his own chest ضَيِّقًا, be really tight. And let's see right there. One thing is that there is a hadith. Let's see this hadith. وَمَا يُرِدْ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants the best for them, they would give them fiqh in deen. Are we talking about the science of fiqh? No. We're just talking about just the general knowledge in deen. So is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving the person, or is that the person putting the effort to get that? Well, I mean, you put in the effort, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had created the system. Whatever effort you put in, that's going to basically give you something in return. You put an effort to crop, I don't know, and plant 200 trees, you're basically going to get 200 trees basically planted, and they're going to give you something in return. That's basically it. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world that you put an effort, even when it comes to dunya, that it will basically come back to based on the effort that you had invested in. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know, well, that's not only as a law or a paradigm in dunya, but that's also the paradigm in akhirah. If in this dunya you plant a tree, you just put in a seed, and then this seed basically, sprouted, and now you get a little sprout. And then once it grew and you were patient long enough, 10 years, 5 years, whatever that takes, and then it didn't just give you one seed or one fruit, but it actually gave you perhaps every single year, you might be getting maybe who knows how many kilos of that fruit. You just planted one seed. So if your investment in this dunya is giving you in return this much, how is it with akhirah? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, well, you do dhikr, la ilaha illallah, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's going to be the seed, and you will get these number of palms in Jannah, these number of gardens in Jannah, these number of castles in Jannah, or whatever it is. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lets us know that just as the paradigm in dunya, that you plant a certain thing, it would come to you in return in the same direction. That's the same thing. You put in the effort. Based on the effort, you put an effort to raise your children based on Islam. Certainly they're going to cry once you say, hey, you need to memorize Quran. I need this. I need you to clean your bathroom. They're going to cry. They're definitely not going to like it. But it isn't until they would get into that discipline. They're going to get into that discipline, and that's going to pay. That's going to pay off. It's basically going to be in their favor. And certainly, you're also, as a parent, you're also going to see that it's going to pay off in their life, and it's going to make them successful people. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills that they would be basically getting a privilege. So khayran, whether we're speaking about privilege, or whether khayran meaning good in life in general, whether it's a good in your marriage, good in probably your business, or good in your life in general, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you fiqh fi din, knowledge in deen. So what is that supposed to mean? The inference is that the key to good, the key to success, is basically learning the basis to the reference in what gives you the right data, the right interpretation, because that is supposed to lead you and guide you to the success that will be in your favor in the hereafter and in this dunya. And you could see this hadith is actually authentic. Okay, so when you look at what is that supposed to mean? Well, that's a form, that's one method of sharh as-sabr. You would not be capable of getting ilm unless you put in a dedication and an amount of time I know it's not easy every single day to attend a 2-hour lecture on tafsir. I absolutely know it's not easy. But guess what? The ones that are, beginners, they may attend 15 minutes, hey, attend 15 minutes, even if it's hard, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, then they'll start growing little by little. Be consistent. And certainly those that would be attending each and every single day for 2 hours and putting in, maybe in the beginning, it may be something that, well, they didn't really focus on the whole lecture for probably the whole 2 hours, but they did hear a couple things, here and there, probably perhaps maybe for 40 minutes, which is really good. And then, of course, later on, they will be capable of putting in more and more focus. How? Just stay consistent. Even if you can't fully understand everything, just stay consistent and let that effort and that determination that you want to learn, that you want to grow, and that you basically are putting in that commitment, that is the grit. That is the grit that will pay off. That is the jihad, that consistency, that perseverance, that jihad. That's basically that combination that will put in, inshallah, in return, that sharh al-sadr. Whether sharh al-sadr, so when you say sharh al-sadr, okay, so you said sharh al-sadr lil-Islam, that basically they will be finding Islam basically the right religion, or what is this talking about? Is this talking about education on Islam? Or is this talking about that? No, this isn't talking about just that they would be finding the religion of Islam. Basically, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, here we go, I've done my shahada, and I basically got it right there. No, this is even for Muslims. Even if you are Muslim, this basically comes with it. That the more you invest in your faith / in the ilm that you would learn, to the discipline that you would basically invest in, okay, that's going to open more of clarity, yashrah, bring in more clarity, bring in basically this vision, this, call it range, because sharh also means range. You remember that book that David Epstein wrote, just putting in a number of different experiences and different things that you would learn, and that's basically going to bring you that range. That's the same thing. Discipline and information. That's going to create a range of vision that's going, yashrah sadrahu lil Islam. You would recognize basically things that will lead you to the way of Islam. Okay, how? Well, basically through ilm. Even if you are Muslim, put in the effort to get the ilm, put in the effort to put in the discipline, and that's going to open up so much to help you recognize how to build and create this foundation to get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to find that clarity. And that's why, look at this hadith. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, even though if you were to go back, you could see that, the scholars of hadith, they said that this was mursal. It's one of those hadith that are not necessarily authentic. And Dhahabi, in his Talkhis al-Mustadrak, he basically said, well, adiyun saqit. In other words, saqit doesn't mean that he's a person of illicit behavior. Saqit means that scholars of hadith did not necessarily regard him as credible resource. But that's not necessarily what all scholars would agree on. Let's see what this hadith is saying before we even get into how credible is this resource. Okay, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he said, "O Prophet of Allah, هل ينشرح الصدر?" Is a chest actually open? Like, is there such a thing as something similar to an epiphany, or something that you would basically find like clarity or anything about opening the sadr or anything like that? And he said, yes. القلب نور يدخل القلب النور. What enters inside the heart is basically a certain light. So, okay, what is that inshirah sadr? That it's basically a certain light that would enter the heart. And Abdullah Mas'ud said, is there a sign to this? Like, how do I know if light exited in my heart? How do I know that? And the Prophet ﷺ responded, التجافي عن دار الغرور. It's basically eschewing, like you're keeping away, you're disregarding basically the house of arrogance. الإنابة إلى دار الخلود. It's basically obedience to the house of eternity. So we're talking about Jannah, basically. It's like, what do you mean by obedience? We're talking about you're submitting, you're basically putting in that discipline because in favor of what? Well, in favor of Jannah. Okay. والاستعداد للموت قبل نزول الموت. And it's getting ready and preparing for death before death comes to you. Okay. So that's that inshirah, according to this hadith, even though, like I said, not authentic, but a lot of meanings to learn from it. So when هل ينشرح الصدر؟ نعم يدخل القلب النور. Yes, the heart will basically have nur enter. Any sign? How do I know? How does that happen? Basically, avoid arrogance, put in an amount of obedience to get to Jannah, and remember to prepare for your death before it comes to you. Although not an authentic hadith, but a lot to learn from this, right? A lot to learn from this. Okay, let's see. So what is the implication? Oh dear, we definitely passed the time. Oh, and we've got some things to do. Okay, here's what I'll do. I'll just leave it at here, and tomorrow we'll actually continue this portion because we definitely, oh dear, we definitely passed our time. So I'll just stop right here. So stay tuned for tomorrow because we still have a lot to say in terms of يشرح صدره للإسلام. So this is where we're at. يشرح صدره للإسلام وما يريد أن يضله. We left off at basically this part. Okay, so tomorrow, inshallah, join us and we will be continuing this ayah because we need to learn more about how this sharh al-sadr actually happens. So stay tuned for tomorrow. Got a lot of things to say, a lot of things to learn. وَهَذَا صِرَاطُ رَبِّكَ مُسْتَقِيمًا لَهُمْ دَارُ السَّلَامِ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ. So yeah, inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow. And سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions before I basically end the live stream, go ahead. I'd love to hear the questions. Okay, no one wants to be in the live stream. That's all right too. Let me just, okay, so the sister says, Surah al-Sharh, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَى رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. Using our time wisely. Absolutely. العلم, الصبر, العفة, and الشجاعة. Right. Absolutely. In Surah al-Sharh, you're absolutely right. Surah al-Sharh basically lets us know that أَلَمْ نَشْرَحْ لَكَ صَدْرَكَ وَوَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ. Beautiful. So وَضَعْنَا عَنْكَ وِزْرَكَ, what can basically affect your ability to have sharh al-sadr is al-wizr. What is al-wizr? Al-wizr is basically sin. So sin can affect your ability to seeking ilm and being committed to discipline. Because remember, ilm is two kinds. There's the knowledge, the theoretical piece of it, or at least the knowledge that you would call it talqini, okay? And there's the other knowledge that is practical knowledge. That's basically that discipline that you would put in. And sin would affect both. Sin would affect both, would affect our ability to process ilm and our ability to live the discipline. And ألم نشرح ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك. أنقض ظهرك. ظهرك is a metaphor. Well, it literally means back, but this isn't talking about back. This is basically a metaphor letting us know that sin can affect our support, can affect our self-esteem, can affect our ability to stay strong. That's basically الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك. And your mention is going to be the Most High. Name Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The name Muhammad is basically the most popular name, even in UK. Imagine, right? Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right. So you look at رفعنا لك ذكرك. Why? Because the disbelievers were telling him that he basically was going to be forgotten. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, رفعنا لك ذكرك. So how do I stay committed? He said, فإن مع العسر يسرا. You just got to recognize that even if you may be struggling, you have to be committed. It's an issue of keeping that commitment, even when you may find some hardship in keeping you on track in seeking ilm or even in living the discipline. That was a really good one, Khasatullah. Good job. Good job. Good job. Very proud of you.